All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started.
I'm here.
I know. You're ready. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, first on the agenda is the Court of Appeals. We are honored to have the Chief Judge Stephen Dillard. And also, I believe that we have anyone accompanying you, Chief Judge? Ms. Kelly, good to see you. I don't know him. Good. Steve, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we go. First of all, I want to thank you and the committee for accommodating me. I was teaching on Monday at Mercer. I teach a class there at the law school, so I appreciate y'all accommodating us.
We missed you. Terrible.
Well, I missed being here, but I did enjoy teaching the students.
My committee members are saying, are we going to make it to 5? Are you going to drag it out to 5, Mr. Chairman, or are you going to? And go ahead.
Well, I also wanted.
Yeah, we got to wait for Mr. Williams to sit down. So
There we go.
no,
Now the party can start. Yeah.
We're ready to go, but we did miss you, but I understand you had those obligations, and thank you for doing that. It's a good public outreach.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also wanted to say at the outset, it's my understanding that y'all had a conversation with Chief Justice Melton with the Supreme Court of Georgia about the audit. We worked closely together with the Supreme Court in terms of crafting our responses and working together with the auditors, and I'm largely in agreement with him, but I'm happy. I don't know if you want to do that now or maybe after the budget, but I'm happy to answer any questions that I'm sure Chief Justice Melton covered all of it, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
We did. I think we went through it thoroughly. I may just have a few questions to confirm things with you after you've gone through the budget presentation.
Great. Okay.
And just so our committee members are aware, we're going to be on the first page of your track sheet, section 5 of the track sheet budget, and we'll start there.
So I wanted to start with 5.11. This is concerning the increase in the daily allowances and commute mileage. We found out that we actually did not have an accurate number. That I don't know how this happened, but we left out Judge Coomer. We did not have him factored in, and obviously we want him to get what he's entitled to. So the good news is that our number is still coming in a little bit lower than last time. So we went from 59,964 to 58,956. But that is what we're, and I believe, Jan, you've communicated with Brian about that number. And 5.1.2, this is about the rental expense due to the relocation into the new judicial building. I think we may have had this discussion before about the number. We're factoring in for the entire year, and the reason for doing that is that if there are moving costs associated, that would be included in that number. And if there's anything, if we come in under that amount, we would return the money.
And at the time, we didn't know when we
At the time, we didn't know. We still don't know when we're moving in. I mean, under the contract, my understanding is we're supposed to move in September. The latest projection is November, and we just don't know. I know it's my understanding there's an incentive to get in there earlier, and so it's at least possible that we could get in earlier. So there was some uncertainty around the number, and that's why we came up with the number that we did.
So the number that's on our budget, the 557, is that based upon November or September?
That's based
Full
on
year.
a full year into the new building. Yes, correct.
So it may be adjusted depending on when.
That's right. We would.
we'll adjust it in the AFY 2020.
The 2021, yeah, we would the
supplemental.
supplemental, right. So 5.1.3, this is the increase. Well, actually, we're going from 70,000 to 0 on this. So this is one where we don't need the money. So that's, I think, self-explanatory. 5.1.4, this is a one-time funding for cybersecurity training, and what we're asking is that the money stay in the budget. This is kind of an ongoing, I know y'all are all familiar with the threat of cybersecurity, and so this is an ongoing expense that we have going forward. 5.15, this is important to me. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I've been a champion of live streaming our oral arguments, and we now want to take it to make sure that all Georgians are able to participate or watch those arguments, be engaged in those arguments. So this is for closed captioning for our oral arguments, and that's part of it is a one-time fee, and then there's some ongoing cost associated with that. That's what, yeah, $13,860 is the one-time setup cost for the closed captioning, and then there's ongoing cost of $32,000 and change a year. The next few, and I've mentioned this before, I think I mentioned this during the supplemental discussion, our central staff, and I don't want to belabor what we've already talked about, but it's a crucial component of our court. They review jurisdiction, they help us prepare our memos to assess the merits of interlocutory and discretionary applications. And one of the biggest functions that they provide for us when times are good and we don't have any of our staff in chambers out on medical leave or family leave, they are in the central staff drafting opinions. We have a pool of opinions, a universe that we determine when they're doing jurisdictional review, and they're doing those on a pro rata basis for all the judges. But for the past year, we haven't really been able to do much of that because we've had so many staff attorneys out. We've had a little bit of turnover, not much, but we've had new judges coming in and bringing in new people, and so we've had them also going there and training some of the attorneys that have come in that have never worked at the Court of Appeals before. So we're really kind of pushing the edge where we're going to have to start taking people from our pool of doing jurisdictional review. And we as part of the expansion of the court and as part of the jurisdictional shifting cases from the Supreme Court to the Court of Appeals, there's a really dire need for additional assistance. That's why we asked for at least one. We asked for one last year. We didn't get it, and I understand that. But this year we're asking for the one that we asked for last year and also another one. So we'd be asking for two central staff positions. That's 5.1.6, 5.1.7. And what that would do is it would bring our central staff up to 15, which would match the number of judges we now have with the expanded Court of Appeals. And we feel like that would give us a good core unit to handle the additional cases that have come down, that would allow us the flexibility when we have people out in chambers that are sick. And that's happened quite a bit. I mean, we've got permanent staff attorneys. These are not folks right out of law school. They have things that come up, and we obviously want to be able to cover for them while they're out and they're sick or they're on family leave.
Mr. Chief Judge, let me ask you a question on
Sure.
this point. And I know I said I would ask you about the audit at the end, so I'm breaking that initial statement. But in looking at the audit report, it did indicate that there had been a decrease in docketed cases over the last 5 years, 2013, 2018, in the Court of Appeals by 11%. So we're going to add 2 more positions for central staff attorneys, and we're seeing a decrease unless that number is not correct.
No, the number is correct, although I have to say, and I've got our Deputy Court Administrator, Chris Smith, here, we're starting to see the numbers tick back up. We don't know if that's because there was that kind of weird period where we had jurisdiction, the Supreme Court had jurisdiction, and then we switched over. But we're starting to see a tick up, especially with divorce-related applications. So, I mean, I can't predict the future, but we're starting to see a tick up in that. We don't have a full year yet, so I don't want to make any. But the biggest issue with folks being out is that's just managing the caseload we have. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest concern is even if we're staying stabilized, when we lose people, we have to have people fill in the gap while they're out. And that's our concern is even if our caseload stays the same for next year, if we start dipping into jurisdictional, that's going to mean that we're going to be cutting into that same, we're going to have less people to do those core functions of jurisdictional review and reviewing discretionary and interlocutory applications.
You and I discussed about kind of the specialization, if you will, of individual members of your central staff, so that you'd have individuals attorneys that were very learned in various aspects of the law. For example, workers' compensation
Right.
was an area that
Correct.
was of concern. And so tell me a little bit about how you're going to go forward in terms of hiring these individuals that may serve either as essential staff or as backup.
No, that's a great question. And actually, I think you and I talked about this too. In the past, it's my understanding at least, that in the past we had some folks in central staff that were essentially dedicated to areas. And I think we are looking, one of the things we don't do is we don't remain static. We're constantly reevaluating how we operate to determine how can we be more efficient with the labor and the people that we've been given. So I can tell you, having been involved in the hiring process, I know we're going to be looking for people that have that. We typically don't hire people for our central staff right out of law school. We're hiring people usually with, I would say, 5 years experience at a minimum. So we would love to have some people from family law, that background, and I think we're going to be looking for that in the hiring process.
And then tell me about how it has gone for the hiring of staff members in general over the last few years, the salary and how quickly you've been able to hire people on.
We have been able to, one of the resources that we have utilized, we've used the 11th Circuit with their staff is probably, if not triple, quadruple our size, but they have a core management team that's permanent, and then in their central staff they rotate. So they're usually only there for around, I think, a maximum of 3.5 years. And so when some of those folks roll off, we will call over and talk to their manager and say, hey, are any of these folks interested? Because while it's not the same, the skill sets, while the subject matter may be a little bit different, there's some overlap, the skills that come, the ability to review these things quickly, to be able to write well, to be able to do in-depth research in a short period of time. That's what we're looking for. So that's what we've been pleased with the universe of folks, our applicant pool.
And could you break down the salaries because it's salary and fringe that you're at the 164 level? So could you break that down for me?
I'm gonna let Jan
answer
that.
I hate to tell you, I did not bring that with me. I believe we put in, it's $100,000 for salary, so that's, I think, step 5 on our salary scale, and that's because we're trying to get a more seasoned employee, and then the rest of it is just fringe benefits. So it's $100,848.
And then you would agree, though, if we were to add either or both these positions, we would have a start date effective July as opposed to January.
That's right. I mean, obviously, we would love to have them before then, but we understand that they would start in July. But if we knew we could start, like if it had been approved, we would know by what, April, May, we could go on and we would immediately start
looking.
Yeah, looking, because we want them to start as soon as possible if we're lucky enough to get those.
Well, take us to the largest request on the budget.
So last year the Supreme Court, that was their big their big ask year. This is our big ask year. They asked and were given the 1-year term clerks, and we. And we're glad that they got that. We think certainly that they are a benefit. We're already hearing good things. There are a lot of benefits to having the 1-year term clerks. Probably the biggest benefit is, as you know, and I heard this was done one year. I didn't bring the props, but if both courts work very hard, but if you look at the amount of writing that's put out, the Court of Appeals is called the workhorse court for a reason. I mean, our volumes for the same amount of time are here, and usually the Supreme Court, and they're reading a lot, but we're writing a lot, and writing a lot requires a lot of labor. And so our feeling was we could have a 1-year term clerk who would come in, much like in the federal system. They would learn a lot. They would be able to assist us with maybe some of the easier cases, and that would help. And the other benefit of it too is if we started to get, let's say our filings go back up. I mean, if you look at prior years, we were up around 32, 33. I think even one year we were up around 35. The beauty of that is it prevents us from having to come back immediately, at least in the near future, and asking for additional central staff if we've got that built-in year term clerk in chambers to help us out. Maybe when even one of the staff attorneys is out, we would still utilize central staff coming in, but that would give us a little bit of a gap. Now, they're not going to have the experience. They're not going to be able to handle the kind of complex cases. At least it would be unlikely that they would handle the kind of complex cases that our more seasoned attorneys handle. But we think there's a lot of benefit in that. We also think there's benefit in having people. We normally don't have a lot of turnover. We don't have people going back and working as lawyers at firms who have been at the court because they stay. I mean, it's an institution. People stay for many years. So we think there's it doesn't seem really tangible, but there's a benefit to having lawyers go out and work at firms like yours and others where they bring that insider knowledge of how the court operates in general and having that out into the profession. I think that's one of the benefits the Supreme Court cited when they asked for it. We understand it's a big ask, but we are the court that got the additional cases during the jurisdictional shift. And we think those cases are going to be going up in the future. We write a lot. The complexity of the cases that we're seeing are only increasing since I've gotten there. Some of the routine cases that look routine initially aren't. And so we could use the help. I think the most pressing need are the central staff attorneys, but I do think we would benefit. I think the entire system would benefit from us having these one-year term clerks to assist us with drafting opinions primarily.
Representative Williams, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems like it should be an obvious answer, but I don't have the answer. Why have the cases gotten so complex in your experience on the bench? What has created this atmosphere? What nature, their particular type of cases, or what?
It's the funny thing is, and I could bore you to death with the details, but there are some
I'm gonna catch you on late night on the street.
that's right. What I'm seeing are a lot of procedurally difficult, complex cases that come up, especially where they start at an administrative level and then they go up to the Superior Court and sometimes it just gets sideways by the time it gets to us. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of really complex commercial transactions, very detailed, involving multiple contracts, multiple entities. It just seems like cases that would normally be more routine have increasingly complex nuances. We've got some the new evidence code. We're still working through that. And deciding kind of what remains from the old that still applies in the new system, and also what 11th Circuit cases that we're going to adopt and where can we depart from that. And, I'll be honest with you, our Supreme Court's been kind of busy lately. They've been putting out a lot of opinions that are requiring us to go back and kind of re-examine our old precedents. They've been a prolific court in putting out opinions and reviewing some of our old precedent. So I don't know that it's just one thing. That's just anecdotally my impression from when I started 8 years ago to where I am now, that the cases, and I think, if you polled my colleagues, that would be the general sentiment, that the cases which in a way is a good thing, right? I mean, more businesses are coming to Georgia. We're the #1 state to do business, and we're going to, I think, start seeing a lot of different subject matters, different types of maybe areas that we haven't seen before that are going to be coming before us.
Thank you. Question for you, Mr. Chief Judge, and this is along the lines of, just so that the new members of our committee can understand, at present, the Supreme Court, in making the request last year, they have, per justice, 2
Correct.
legal assistants, if you will, or
Right.
internal, in-chambers law.
Right.
Do you call it a law clerk?
Staff attorneys,
Staff
right?
attorney, that's
Yeah,
right.
they had 2.
2,
Yeah,
and each member of the Court of Appeals has
it's
3.
That's right.
That's okay.
Right.
So the ad for last year was a request to add a 3rd staff attorney by the Supreme Court.
Right.
And then that was modified by the Senate
Right.
to go to this judicial law clerks program. Is that
That is, and we've, as you know, I think we've been having that discussion. I think we even raised it prior to them about the idea in the future that once we get our core group and central staff, that future requests would be made to get people who would come in for 1 or 2 years and rotate out. So we've had the discussion that we need to maybe move toward that model of bringing in for the more routine. There's still important matters. I don't want to diminish that, but I think as we move toward that type of work, that we could have younger attorneys, new graduates come in and handle some of that, obviously with the oversight of more seasoned attorneys.
Well, I understand the thought process, the rationale behind the request, and I see the benefits both to the court and to the bar and to the public as a whole. We do, just so you know, and being candid, we have some challenges in terms of the budget.
Sure.
This year, we have some priorities that I think we were trying to address with the governor. So I'll leave that with you.
Well, and if I'm being completely candid with y'all, I mean, obviously, we think we would greatly benefit from all of these things, and we certainly at least wanted to start the discussion regarding the term clerks, because I do think it's something that, once again, both courts work really hard, but we're putting out the bulk of the written opinions, and those are crucial. Having those opinions and having the labor to really spend the time and get in depth, I think, is important for the state and important for the appellate system. But the central staff positions, these two are crucial. I mean, the 15 would be very helpful. I don't want to act like we're not interested in that, because we are.
Right.
But the two central staff positions are crucial. I mean, we're at a point now where I'm worried about us cutting into our core functions if we don't have.
It's very helpful to know the priorities of the court, and I know all of these are priorities.
Right.
But it's helpful to the committee to know
Right.
what is essential, what is an absolute need, as opposed to maybe a want that may progress into a need. But
Right.
so I find that's very helpful. Questions from members of the committee? Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Chief Judge. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for members of the court for also showing support and being here as well. And thank you to the staff. We appreciate all of you and your hard work. And I don't mean to cut short, but
Not at all.
I
Not
got to
at
go
all.
right on to the next one. So
All right. Thank y'all
otherwise,
very
these guys are
much.
going to get mad at me and walk out.
I appreciate it. Thank y'all.
We have the next one is Department of Law. This is Section 33, your track sheets, page 17 on your track sheet. So if you'll take a look at that page, we'll go to the Department of Law with our Attorney General, Chris Carr, come to join us, and Adam Ross, the Director of Financial Services, will be joining him. Section 33, page 17.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for having us. And again, thank you, as always, for your support for the department and that of the support of the entire committee. Thank you very much. You want me to just start, Mr. Chairman, with the track sheet, which we don't have any changes on. This is the track sheet itself, no modifications. That's all statewide. But I do have 3 items I wanted to bring to your and the committee's attention. And the first is a request for 4 IT litigation support folks within our operations division. 4 positions that would be $250,000 in salary, $402,398 with benefits as well. And Mr. Chairman,
Say that one more time, please.
$250,000 in salary with benefits, it'd be $402,398. $402,398.
Got it.
And Mr. Chairman, as our team has spoken with you, and this comes as no surprise, but the need is twofold. One is security. We need more folks to help us. We've got some very sensitive data, obviously, that our clients, our agencies, that we're working with them on to have the ability to work with them. And the 4 positions, Mr. Chairman, would be infrastructure manager, applications manager, and 2 litigation support specialists.
And part of that is because we've transitioned into a realm of electronic discovery.
That's right.
So all documents are coming in. Effectively, we're not handling paper. We're handling digital files.
That's exactly right.
And with that, there comes a risk to the system of digital files, also including viruses.
That's correct.
Intentional and unintentional.
Which we have seen, and so this would allow us to work with our lawyers and our professionals investigators and others to make sure we address it. Just to give you an example on volume 2, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee, the department's need for storage increased by 7,500% in 8 years, 7,500%. So secure and volume, and in part, it will help us as we have started our opioid litigation as well. And this is a massive lawsuit that we've undertaken on behalf of the people of Georgia, and this will help us as well. So
You've joined with a number of other states, is that correct?
well, we have our own lawsuit, Mr. Chairman, that we have filed against the manufacturers and the distributors in Gwinnett County. And we'll actually be moving to transfer that to the business court. And we think that that puts the state in a better position. As you're aware, there is a federal.
We've got to get you a business court, right?
Well, they've got it in Gwinnett.
Okay.
But yes, on the other front, that'd be good for the rest of the state as well. But Gwinnett does have it, and there are federal cases that have been consolidated in Ohio. We are not a part of that. We have filed our own lawsuit because we think that that's going to put the state in the best position. So those 4 IT positions would be the first item, and you want me to continue on? Okay.
Please.
And the second item we wanted to come and ask the committee for is to create or to enhance our human trafficking prosecutorial ability. The department has had the authority to prosecute human trafficking, and we haven't had the resources or the personnel to do that. And this is a priority of mine. I just think that we have done an outstanding job working with federal, state, and local partners as it relates to awareness and training. But as the chairman knows, as so many on the committee know, this is a horrific crime. And to be able to have the ability, we do have the authority, we think that we can fund 2 prosecutorial positions internally, but we need 4 support staff. If you're going to do this right, you've got to have a criminal investigator, a crime analyst, a victim advocate, and an administrative assistant to help with the human trafficking prosecutions unit. And this would truly show the commitment of the state to be able to assist U.S. attorneys, district attorneys, our state agencies that we work with. We are going to make this a priority and make sure that we put violent criminals that are selling kids for sex behind bars. So we do need some help on the support side. We internally can fund the 2 prosecutor positions as far as that goes. So we will be asking for $210,000 in salary, which would be $342,300 in benefits, all in with benefits as well. And we will certainly provide more information to you and your staff and the committee as well.
In terms of these cases, how would they come to you?
Well, we think a couple of different ways. First and foremost, through our agency partners. GBI has a Crimes Against Children's unit. We work extensively, obviously, with DFACS. One of the unfortunate sources of information is our K-12 system. And the other thing, Mr. Chairman, is if folks know that the state is doing this, and also through DAs and through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I think that's why it's critically important that you have good relationships with everybody. And there are times where you're going to want to allow the U.S. Attorney to take the lead, or DA to obviously, if they're on the front lines, take the lead. But where can we make a difference from the state's perspective as well? But also, again, once folks know that the state is doing it and is committed to it and will do it right, which is why you have to have not just prosecutors, but you have to have that support staff, then we believe that working with partners that are already doing this every day, we'll be able to have more work than we'll know what to do with. But this is a good start.
And then your third request?
And then the third request, Mr. Chairman, just as you know, we've got 2 great units, the Consumer Protection Division as well as Medicaid Fraud, that have brought in funds to the state through settlements and otherwise. Just to give you an example, in fiscal year 2018, the Medicaid Fraud unit brought in about $11 million to the state. Year before, $125 million. This fiscal year alone, we're around $4 million. And the Consumer Protection Division, over the past 4 years, 2016, we brought in about $6 million, and that goes to the Treasury. Medicaid Fraud goes to DCH, but the Consumer Protection Division goes to Treasury. So $6 million that we brought in fiscal year 16, nearly $20 million in 17, $4 million in 18, and just this fiscal year alone, almost $21 million in money for the Treasury. And what the law currently allows us is to keep $168,000 from that recovery amount to do consumer awareness. So, for example, we've done a basic training app for military folks dealing with fraud, dealing with scams. We've got an online app, and we also have a hard copy. We've done an elder abuse guide that we've got a hard copy that we've part. We could do more of that. So we're asking to keep up 500,000 rather than 168. But that would only come from money that we recover as a result of these the investigations and the settlements that we get through these units. So that wouldn't be appropriated. That would just be in addition. And it would just allow us to do more public awareness, do more online, do more guides, that sort of thing. And we're currently working on a consumer protection guide for small businesses, houses of worship, and nonprofits as it relates to cybersecurity and best practices. So those would be our 3 requests, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Questions from members of the committee? Chairman Belton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you talk to me about what the airlines are doing to try to do to address this human trafficking, and how you're coordinating with them, or are you?
Absolutely, we are, and I've got to give Delta a lot of credit. They have really done, and others have, but Delta's really taken the lead on training for flight attendants, pilots, and others. Part of what we do, Representative Belton, is what's called Demand and End. It's a partnership with the GBI and a nonprofit called Street Grace. And the whole purpose of Demand and End is focusing on that demand side and doing training. So we've partnered with folks like Delta, UPS, Truckers Against Trafficking. But to have our law enforcement folks do such a good job, we ask them to be all things to all people. This allows us to supplement and help them. As I've said, the more eyeballs we have on the problem, the better off it's going to be. And you've got to have, and I've got to say, Hartsfield has been a great partner, the city of Atlanta, Delta, and we've had some great partnerships there. But we also see it's not always folks that are coming from someplace else. It's unfortunately homegrown. But what a great partnership that we have, and I truly commend Delta for what they've done.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. General, good
Yes,
to
sir.
see you.
Always good to see
Thank
you,
you
sir.
for coming. Two-part question.
Yes, sir.
In your suit against the opioid manufacturers,
Yes, sir.
now, is that tied in to your Medicaid fraud, because there's a lot of money involved? Are you tying that into the fraud? And I'd be interested in that. And last year, I talked to you about
Yes, sir.
Medicaid fraud.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen, don't factor in opioids because they're continually growing, but have you seen a decrease or an increase in Medicaid fraud cases, and if so, where?
So let me answer it first. The first is that the lawsuit itself is actually coming out of our Consumer Protection Division. And in a nutshell, the lawsuit against the manufacturer says, in essence, you said that opioids either weren't addictive or weren't as addictive, and we believe that was a fraudulent statement. In a nutshell, it's more complicated than that. Against the distributors, it is that you have a state and a federal obligation to monitor suspect orders, and where you see them, to prevent them from continuing along in the pipeline. And we said you failed to do that. In essence, it's more complicated than that, but that'll give you. So that's coming from our Consumer Protection Unit in partnership with a number of state agencies that have been impacted by this crisis. The role that Medicaid fraud is playing going forward is any role that providers may end up playing in this. So that is a separate piece, but one that is not insignificant. And I get asked often, okay, so you've done this with the manufacturers, the distributors, what about doctors or pharmacists? And I said, look, if you're a doctor or a pharmacist that has done things the right way, you got nothing to worry about. However, if you've abused the system and violating the law, you probably need to be looking over your shoulder. And we can get you the volume of Medicaid cases as well. I don't have that with me right now, but I can tell you they are involved. And I will put a plug. Elder abuse has been one of the issues. We talked about this last year. Big issue of mine. We have a case going on right now that involved a landlord, a pharmacist, a nurse, and a financial planner that started in Southwest Georgia, and it involved veterans. And we've had one individual, the pharmacist or the pharmacist, Travis, is that right? The pharmacist who has pled in this particular case, but it is a great example of partnering with federal agencies, federal law enforcement, state agencies, and the DA's office. And this is going to continue to be an issue of mine because we have what's called unlicensed personal care homes, which are individuals that are out there recruiting. And that's got to stop because that's where a lot of abuse, both financial exploitation and physical abuse, occurs.
Mr. General, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
and
Chairman.
Thank you for taking up or championing the crusade against those criminals, both in the elder abuse and on the opioid front.
Thank you, sir.
So we applaud those efforts.
Thank you.
And we will take these requests under consideration.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the committee as well.
All right, next on our agenda is the Department of Community Supervision. Commissioner Michael Neal is here. However, he wants Scott Maurer to present on behalf of the agency, so we will hear from him, and the budget director, of course, is Olivia Duke. We will be on section 18, page 7 of your track sheet. Olivia, hello. Section 18, page 7 of your track sheet.
And Mr. Chairman, before we get started, let me thank you as well as the committee. As I look back at the creation of DCS, a number of you have gone on ride-alongs. A number of you have spoken at graduations. A number of you have met one-on-one with the chiefs in your area to gain a better understanding. And some have even created reentry pilot sites. So I wanted to thank you as well as the entire committee for your support and also for allowing Assistant Commissioner Maurer to present. I'm also going to have Jennifer Thomas come up in case you have questions about Georgia Commission on Family Violence, who is attached with us.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Deputy Commissioner, go ahead, or Assistant Commissioner, go ahead.
Good afternoon, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman and committee members, to present to you today. You should have in front of you a very brief presentation outlining the FY20 budget request that we have. I'm going to skip the very first slide that is just kind of an overview of all those items. I do briefly want to brag a little bit about Department of Community Supervision, and I think it's relevant to the request that we have in that, just this week we had a conference call and scheduled a visit with the state of Maryland on, they're very interested in the way we've implemented our virtual offices as well as this Georgia PRI sites. And so I asked our chief operating officer to go back and look, how many other states, because it's been a lot, have asked to come visit us and look at the work that we're doing at Department of Community Supervision in Georgia. And it's about 14 other states in a very short period of time, in about a 2-year span, that have come visit Georgia as well as our department to look at many of the initiatives that are impacted by the budget request today. So we're getting quite a bit of not just state of Georgia recognition, but national recognition for some of these initiatives. So on line 18.1.6 in the Department Administration, this is just a transfer of funds to the State Board of Pardons and Parole in the amount of $30,000. This was actually handled in the previous years via an MOU, and this is just a permanent state transfer of funds related to teamwork billings and some of the differences between when the agencies were combined or separate and when DCS was formed, the number of employees that moved to us and the transactional data. So this is just a request to permanently transfer those funds to State Board of Pardons and Parole. On the next page, line 18.2.6, field services to expand the court specialist pilot. One of the things that we always make a top priority when we're looking at our budget requests is how can we reduce the caseloads of the officers that are supervising in the field, because we know that the lower those caseloads are, the more effective they can be at supervising the highest risk offenders. And so this request actually accomplishes a couple different goals, but one of them primarily is focused on increasing the ability for officers to lower their caseloads and supervise those caseloads effectively. So it's for 60 current positions that are impacted. The ask is for $740,112. And what it does is it gives some of our administrative staff that we've noticed after closing some offices and going to a virtual framework for supervision, that they have some extra room and capacity for additional duties. This request puts them in a position where they take officers that are currently sworn staff that are primarily working court. They don't go out, they don't have a caseload, they don't go out in the field and supervise offenders in the field, they work court, and they're sworn staff. And so replacing those staff with an administrative position, currently an administrative position, they get more training, more responsibilities, increased duties, and they are the conduit between the courts and that local circuit. And so they handle the court cases, they handle a lot of the pleas for us. And so what we're asking is we've currently got in place 25, by the end of this year, we'll have 28 court specialists in place. And this ask is to expand that to 60 positions being impacted completely. So that is on line 18.2.6.
Can you provide us with information on how you'll spread those court specialists out, their concentrations and geographic locations?
Sure. So currently, we are those court specialist positions. So the initial positions were put in 5 circuits. Those 5 circuits we considered to be some of the more difficult circuits as far as getting buy-in from the judiciary about whether or not they're comfortable with our officers being in there.
You can, just in the interest of time, if you have that on a sheet that you can give to us,
Yeah,
provide to Courtney,
absolutely.
we'll just take a look at it offline.
The circuits expansion, no doubt.
Yes,
We can do that, sir.
where you place the 28 and then where you intend to place the remaining 60.
Yes, sir. We can provide that to you. So on the next page of the presentation then are 2 recommendations that came out of the ZBB recommendations. One is, and these are merely transfer of funds from one budget program to another, transfer the max out reentry or more staff to the Governor's Office of Transition Support and Reentry Services. And it's a transfer of $1.195 million. And then the second one is a transfer of our professional standards personnel, and that impacts 5 positions totally to our administrative budget and out of the field budget. On the next page, on lines 18.3.5, this is a request to fund JRI positions, which is the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. These positions were previously grant funded. That grant ran out in May of last year, and we entered into an agreement. So to put some context around the original grant funds, those grants were obtained by the Department of Corrections. And so when those grants ran out, those 9 positions no longer were funded by grant funds. We funded 50% of those positions, and the Department of Corrections agreed through MOU to fund the other 50%. So this ask is to fully fund with state funds those 9 grant-funded positions. Next to that, on line 18.3.6, is expansion of the Georgia PRI initiative to 10 new locations. I know this committee, over the past couple of years, we've talked a lot about the Georgia Prison Reentry Initiative and the staff associated with it and the work that they do. We are currently in 17 pilot sites. Last year, we did not ask to expand those sites because we were awaiting on an evaluation to be completed by Applied Research Services. They have completed that evaluation. It is about a 125-page document, and some of the highlights and some of the justifications for why we are asking for this expansion to 10 additional sites. One of them is that currently those 17 pilot sites cover jurisdictions that about 60% of prisoner releases released to. By adding these new additional 10 pilot sites, it'll give us another 20%. So we will then have that Georgia PRI staff and program in place in jurisdictions that represent 80% of those being released from prison on a yearly basis. And so that will give us the most impact on the most offenders in those jurisdictions. And secondly, I think, and most importantly, one of the things that the grants called for was a reduction in the rate of change for revocation. And so the initial grant target was 15% reduction, and through the research evaluation that ARS did, the PRI sites met that at 14%. But in addition to that, it also decreased by 10% the revocation rate for any arrest, meaning misdemeanor or felony, in those same pilot sites. And they were also, over the course of the pilot sites, able to add 3,500 additional new resources to the state of Georgia and to the Department of Community Supervision. Resources being employers, substance abuse resources, mental health resources to address those criminogenic needs of those offenders that are in that PRI program. And so
Let me pause right there. Representative Williams, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On 18.3.6, your reentry initiative,
yes, sir.
adding 10 new locations.
Yes, sir.
And I understood how they were stood up originally, and my district was one of the pilot programs, and certainly has seen a difference. I think that it's vitally important. I'd like to see, whenever possible, a copy of the evaluation.
Yes, sir.
Yes, one of the things about this is, if you happen to live in a small community that still has crime, you should have just as much access as the largest area in Georgia. And there are a lot of rural areas that we have not been able to see. And we've got to do this thing where 159 counties are touched. Now, there might be one or two that has no crime. But I think that it's just not fair to a small community. The resources are small, but they don't get a shot at this apple. We've really got to do something about that.
I completely agree with that, and I believe that, you know, that's not just an issue that our agency faces. I think it's an issue that many agencies face as far as the resources, especially when you talk about mental health counselors, substance abuse counselors being available in those areas. We just have had that discussion with other partners across the state about the fact that there's just a lack of those resources available in those areas, and so capacity building is certainly very important in those areas.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I think that a lot of emphasis on rural development, but
Yes, sir.
that look has to be comprehensive. We can't just do the headline pieces. You cannot have rural development if you aren't dealing with rural crime. You got to do it. So you can't be left out because you happen to live in a county of 15,000 where jailers make $15,000 a year. Something got to be done about it.
Agreed.
Go ahead.
So the ask on for the expansion to 10 new locations is $1,069,898. That is for 10 additional community coordinator positions and 10 additional in-reach positions. The community coordinators are the ones that are identifying the resources in the community. The in-reach positions are positions that are located in the prison system itself. They identify the reentry needs of inmates prior to them being released to the community and coordinate with the community coordinator as well as the DCS staff to ensure that when they are released, that their criminogenic needs, that they have the ability to meet those needs when they get out and not 60, 90 days down the road after they get out. And then the last page of the presentation is just the 2020 bond requests, and that is to cover replacement vehicles at $575,000, and then major maintenance and repairs at $535,000.
Go back to line 18.3.7 with the max out reentry.
Yes, sir.
Now, explain that again to me, the transfer of 13 positions.
So that was part of the ZBB recommendations, and those 13, so the max out reentry program is essentially a reentry program. We have Department of Community Supervision officers in all the transitional centers. And so they work directly with those offenders that are maxing out of prison, and whether it be through statute or through the parole board's decision, and they make sure that they have the resources they need in the community. And so that is primarily a reentry function, and so this just transfers those positions to the reentry budget.
But why wouldn't that be handled just by the prison reentry initiative?
So, but that's essentially what it's doing, is it's moving it into the reentry unit, which also encompasses the prison reentry initiative. And so it's a very similar function. It just wasn't, the max out reentry program was in place prior to the Georgia PRI initiative and the pilot sites. And so it's essentially combining all those things in one unit.
Okay. going back up to administration, I'm sorry, field services. You're asking us to reclassify the 60 existing administrative positions. Are we to expect that next year you'll be asking to backfill those administrative assistants now?
No, sir. No, sir. Those are positions that we currently feel will be able to move into those court specialist positions, and we will not be asking to backfill any administrative positions.
Questions from members of the committee? Can you, while they're thinking, we had talked about, and this has been an ongoing discussion, about tangible, quantifiable, if you will, not anecdotal, success stories that come out of the reentry program.
Yes, sir.
So tell, and you mentioned, I heard a little bit about 10% reduction in recidivism, but and I know you've built these relationships, the 3,500, but tell us more about what the measurables are. What are you measuring in terms of determining whether or not there's been success with the reentry program, and then what documented evidence do you have to show that we are actually meeting those measurables?
So I think the primary thing to this point has been ARS's evaluation, and they have quite a few outcome variables within that report that it's, they looked at it from, did we meet the statewide reduction goal, but they also looked at and built a database for how are we building capacity across the state. Like, for example, I think one of the questions that you asked in a previous budget hearing was about direct linkages to employment. And so they started tracking that, and they can show that through FY19 there was over 4,000 direct linkages to employment, and so there's a lot of data within that report.
Is a link, but I know we talked about this before, but is a linkage a contact or is it actual employment?
So the contact would be the community coordinator making contact with available employment in the community or employers in the community. The linkage means that they directly took somebody that's part of the PRI program, an offender, and linked them with an employer, resulting in an employment opportunity for that offender.
And are we measuring, do we keep track of the individual to determine whether or not he or she is still remain employed and how long?
Yes, sir. That is something that's a report that we can pull out of our database as far as the number of days employed consecutively. Now, sometimes that employment might change. They might get experience at one employer that gives them enough experience to get a better job somewhere else, but consistent employment, yes. Yes, sir.
Their ability to transfer and maybe improve their employment status is positive, and I think that we should be looking at that. But also, I'm concerned about them becoming unemployed.
Yes, sir.
And then that's my primary concern. And the secondary, I do want to see how someone is accelerating through the workforce as a result of, hopefully as a result of the reentry and the communications you've had and the linkage that you've created between reentry and a job. Chairman Ballinger.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that the revocation rate had been greatly reduced. I think 15% was the number that you had mentioned. How much of that has been, do you have any way of tracking probation violations that are actually revoked and how many are handled administratively within your department?
So we have a continuum of sanctions. And so we do track the number of sanctions that are applied to somebody. So maybe the first time somebody commits a
can you pause right there?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be rude, but I just, from my clarification and my understanding, how many of those sanctions is there any way to that do you have whenever there's a violation? Do you track violations? Not
Yes,
necessarily. Okay, so each individual whenever somebody is violating, then that is. Do you know how many of those result in a revocation?
I don't know that off the top of my hand. No.
Has there been a reduction in violations?
Yes. Yes. So the reduction in, because otherwise those people would never get to a revocation hearing to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So Some violations are handled administratively, but when those violations get to a point where they need to be reported back to the court or back to the board, then that's when it results in a revocation.
At what
Potentially
point
results in a revocation.
does the violation of the sentence result in a court hearing?
So for somebody that's under probation supervision, if they commit a new felony, a serious misdemeanor offense, or violate a special condition, those are all offenses that can be reported, where you can go back in front of the judge for a revocation hearing for.
Okay.
Now, you cannot revoke somebody for technical violations only. So those things have to take place in order for somebody to be revoked. Now, you can take them back for modification of that sentence, or they can go to an alternative as a result of technical violations, but not revoked directly to a state prison.
Does your department track fidelity, sentence fidelity? So in other words, if somebody is sentenced on a drug offense and one of their conditions is stay away from drugs, and how many times they're tested for potential violations, is there any fidelity to that original sentence that was issued by the judge? Is there any way of tracking that?
So those are a lot of data points that we do collect, and we can track, or at least put together a report and
Okay.
report
I would
them
be
back.
very interested in seeing that. Thank you.
Chairman Belton, did you have a question a minute ago?
Yes, sir. What's the sense of have you had the JRI, the state of Georgia, of funding the positions that the federal government took away from you? I understand that the funding, the JRI, you had funding for the JRI that the federal government was doing that the state that they're not doing anymore. Is that correct?
Correct. Those are grant-funded positions, yes.
Because how have we been able to fund them with the state money since then?
So that's part of what the request is for, is to fund, so the online 18.3.5, those positions were grant-funded positions. We're now asking the state fund those positions.
Okay.
The next request is actually, those are new positions, new state positions.
New state positions.
They were not previously on a grant-funded position.
Thank you.
I think the chairman was asking what success has that initiative provided? You know, what benefits has it provided? Why would we continue it?
So that goes back to the original, when I stated that, the original purpose of the goal in that grant was to reduce the rate of reconviction among those pilot sites by at least 15%, and we hit the goal at 14%. And then there's also the capacity building that has gone along with it.
The goal was 15 and you hit the goal at 14?
Well, and so initially BJA said that 15% goal was extremely high,
Okay.
and that they didn't necessarily expect people to be able to hit that goal. And so if you read the ARS report, Dr. Spears and the rest of them also cite in there that they consider that a success, that the goal was met.
And have you provided the committee a copy of the ARS report
We have provided.
We provided it to Courtney, but we will.
as of yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it would be helpful to have those reports much
Yes.
further in advance
I understand.
in order for us to read them and ask pertinent questions and already know the data, and maybe we wouldn't have to ask so many questions. So if you could just provide those as soon as you can when session's gearing up so that we can disseminate them to the members.
Yes, sir.
Other questions from members of the committee? All right. Well, thank you very much.
And I just want to make sure that
Oh, yeah,
there's
sorry.
no questions for Ms. Thomas.
I think there was one. There was a $10,000 funding request. Is that right, Ms. Thomas? The request. So you turn the page over, gentlemen, ladies, to section 18.5. What's that? It was an amended. Oh, it's an agency request? Okay. My understanding was that you have made a request for an additional 10,000, is that right?
Well, we did earlier last year when we were sort of instructed by the previous administration to do a 2% enhancement. So that was the request that we had sent out at that point. For this year, the only request that we're making is the request that Governor Kemp has put in for a 2% increase for salary positions.
Okay. And then was there a, okay, all right. And there was funding for training. Didn't we put some money in for training before?
No, sir. The last time we came before you to ask for funding was to hire a compliance coordinator for our family violence intervention programs. And so we have been successful, and that position is still functioning.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Question from Mr. Williams.
I'm curious.
Yes, sir.
How have counties participated? What kind of participation do you find kind of help you get from county-funded family violence programs?
Sure. So that would be a different conversation to have with Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. They provide that funding for the state goes through CJCC to local domestic violence programs. So there are 49 domestic violence state certified programs in our state. And so I think CJCC would be more appropriate to answer
Good.
that question for you.
How many employees do you have?
Sure. So we have, within our office, we provide certification for 116 batters intervention programs. And with our new rule implementation for the batters intervention program, we're now certifying just over 200 individual facilitators as well.
All right, and Chairman Ballinger.
Al, I was just going to speak to the question that you asked Jennifer, because there's VOCA and VAWA grants, and I'll be more than happy to clarify that for you offline.
All right, any other questions? I see none. I want to thank you, Assistant Commissioner, very much for being here, and thank you for all the information you provided. Olivia, thank you very much for providing that information to us today and yesterday. With that, we'll have the Department of Corrections come up. Let me ask a question before we call the Department of Corrections, just for a second. Let me do this. Let me ask the department. Joe Ferraro, are you here today? Yes. All right. So Department of Defense, if we could have the Deputy Adjutant General come up, what I'd like to do is just go ahead and hit the Department of Defense and then GEMA, then take a break, and then we'll come back and hit corrections, and we'll conclude with corrections. So if you'll turn to page 11, section 20 of your track sheet, we'll get right to the Department of Defense.
Sir. Mr. Chairman.
Deputy Tagg, nice to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great seeing you and the rest of the committee today. I've got Mr. Kenley Finlayson with me today. He's handing out a little bit of an overview here for you that might help things speed along a little bit. General Cardin sends his greetings. He's still at the capstone program. He's got about 2.5 more weeks, and he'll be back in the saddle. But we're in daily contact with him, and he appreciates us having the chance to be here to present our budget to you today. So the quick review of our budget, we are involved in the new Cyber Center over in Augusta. This request is on line 20.2.4. Our share of the rent at the facility is going to be $79,600. That's been added to our budget. We're going to be running the secure compartmentalized information facility at that Cyber Center in Augusta. So that's going to be our role there. We're going to have a few full-time staff members that we're putting on place, but they are going to be paid through the federal system. The next category is on line item 20.3.5. The Youth Challenge Academy program. We get audited every year in that program by auditors sent down by National Guard Bureau from Washington, D.C. And this last go-around, they have written us up for being short on our ratios of staff to cadets. So this request of $175,000 is to increase the number of cadre instructors, counselors, and case managers. It probably won't get, it won't get us to 1 to 25, but it's going to increase it substantially, and it will also, we lose about 1/3 of the cadets when they show up. We usually start a class with about 300, knowing that we're going to graduate around 200 to 225, and having a better staff ratio will help us focus on those cadets even more, and that's the key to keeping them in the program, is having a good interface with the staff. The staff really can work with them to get them to complete the program successfully. I will point out that along with that $175,000 in state money, the federal program, the Department of Defense, kicks in $424,000. It's a 3-to-1 match. Job Challenge Academy, similarly, that's line item 20.3.6. We have a request for $450,000 in that program. That's going to be matched by $1.35 million of federal dollars, again through the Department of Defense. This did start off as a Department of Labor grant program 3 years ago. Georgia was one of 3 programs across the country, and not to brag, we're the only program in the country that hit our target rate. You'll see in some backup information that we provided in the next couple pages behind in that handout that out of our 300 target, we graduated 311. The great thing about that is this program helps make our cadets, when they graduate from Youth Challenge Academy, it's a follow-on program for that. Youth Challenge, we work with them to get a high school diploma or a GED. The military, believe it or not, does not count GEDs as Tier 1 recruits. They're Tier 2 recruits, so they need some college credit before they can become a Tier 1 recruit that the Army or the Air Force or Navy, Marines will look at them. This Job Challenge Academy provides that backup education that then qualifies them as Tier 1. And you'll see out of the 311, 51 of those graduates have joined the military. We think that's key. The Youth Challenge, Job Challenge, it's a great thing. It gets the kids who have dropped out of high school, it gets them in a residential program away from home, away from where they were getting themselves in trouble. We think it's key to that when they graduate from us, that they go off somewhere else in the world and continue their life. And the military is a good option for some of them. So we don't want them to go back to where they were getting in trouble and continue down that path. So that's
But the military isn't the only.
no, that's
course.
just 51 out of 311 have joined the military.
So tell us about the others.
So there's a little pie chart there on the backup slides that kind of goes through it. I can't tell you about the geographic location for all of them, but you'll see that, so military, and then the biggest chunk, the 60%, they are employed in their trade that they've learned while they were in Job Challenge Academy: welding, automotive technician, culinary arts, LPN, those professions. So some of them continue on in education in that trade. They'll go out and get advanced education in it, and so that's a pretty healthy percentage as well. And then there's a sliver of them that are employed but not in the field that they just got their training for, but that's just a few percent. And then there's another 5% that we they drop off the radar. They don't stay in touch with us.
Yeah. Questions, Representative Williams, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Always good to see you.
Yes, sir.
I think it's important that folk understand, because a lot of times if you aren't near one of these, you get the impression that it's primarily populated by people who are socioeconomically challenged. There are a lot of kids from solid middle class backgrounds
Yes, sir.
get into these programs because they have had problems in the traditional school setting.
Yep.
And this discipline, return on investment here is unbelievable, because you take a kid that we might start spending, $18,000, $20,000 a year to incarcerate and make them taxpayers.
Yes, sir. I will say that there's a RAND study that's getting a little bit outdated now, and I believe that the Department of Defense is having another one commissioned to look at the payback on it again. But the RAND study that still is out there says for every dollar that is put into this program, society, the country is saving, I think it's around $2.50 through reduced incarceration costs and so forth. And then, of course, the state's percentage of that dollar is 25 cents.
But as a, yeah, and following up on what Representative Williams was saying, but Georgia's leading the nation in this regard. So we're not only are we getting the advantage in terms of providing the nation as a whole, but our state is taking the lead on this, so.
Yes, sir. This program has been around, the Youth Challenge program has been around since 1993, and there are about 35 states, I believe, that have them, and there are about 40 total campuses. Some states have 3, as Georgia does, California and Louisiana, and there's a couple other ones that have two campuses, I believe. But out of the total national graduate count since 1993, the total count is 160,000 across the country. Georgia's share is almost 17,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we've graduated over 10% of the kids who've gone through this program nationally.
And the job challenge too. Speak
Yes,
to
sir.
that. That's new, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And how many states have a job challenge?
Well, there were 3 in the initial rollout that was funded by the Department of Labor, and now that it's a DoD program, there are 3 more, I believe. California, I think it's Florida, and North Carolina, I believe.
Associated with bases?
Associated with the Youth Challenge program, which is almost always on a military base or a former military base. I know some states have put them on decommissioned bases, Air Force bases that have been shut down. And Georgia, of course, we have one in Fort Gordon, one in Fort Stewart, and our third one is in Milledgeville. That's the most recent one. It's on the grounds of Central State Hospital. But typically they're on or close to a military base.
Chairman Belton, you have a question?
Thank you, Colonel. Isn't it true that back in the old days, like when you and I got in, they'd take just about anybody in the military, but nowadays it's actually
They took me.
No, that's right. And then me, yeah. So, but nowadays it's actually quite difficult to get in the military. The educational requirements are quite high.
Yes, sir. That is true. It's a supply and demand business. When we were at the height of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, and we had 50,000 people on the ground at a time, the recruiting, the aperture widened quite a bit. And now that we're down to 10,000 or so, it's narrowed back down again. So it is harder to get in today than normal.
Follow-up question, sir. Isn't it true that Georgia has the second best in any state of people going into the military?
For just the general population,
Yeah.
I know Georgia is one of the prime recruiting states, and I wasn't aware that we were
Yes,
number
sir.
2, but I know we'd certainly be in the top rank. Yes, sir.
Chairman Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going back to the Youth Challenge Academies,
Yes, sir.
some of the information you shared with my committee last week, the success stories are uncanny about what happens with this program, and it's the return on investment that the state gets. I believe you actually had, you or the general had some of those numbers on the return on investment on that.
Well, that's the one that's the RAND study that it says
Okay.
for every dollar that is put into the program, it generates about $2.50 or $2.80 in savings to society through, again, reduced incarceration rates and welfare and all that. Because these guys are out, and gals, instead of being any kind of a burden, they're out in a job paying taxes.
And one success was in Alaska. Alaska has benefited from our program, correct?
Yes, we had one of the graduates from our very first class down at Fort Stewart back in 1993 is now the Surgeon General for the state of Alaska.
Well, John. Well done. Good
Yep.
job. Good.
Yep. He's a great example.
All right. Other questions from members of the committee?
Okay. The only other one is just the 2% pay raise. We kind of accumulated, we have 3 different program areas, and we just accumulated the total cost of that. It's $136,000 across our 650 state employees. That will take care of it. Again, most of our state employees are either they're almost all matched with federal dollars, like 25-75 or 50-50, in some cases 100% federal dollars. We only have 14 employees in our department out of the 650 state employees who are fully state paid. All the rest of them have a federal share.
Just a question about the your parking spaces.
Oh.
And why are you being charged for parking spaces?
It's just part of the rent at the facility. I mean, it's not that we're really paying for the parking spaces, as I understand it. It's just that we're assigned so many parking spaces. That probably is misleading. But GTA manages the facility, and people who have office space in there have to pay rent, and that's our share is the $79,600.
So it's rent? then?
It's rent, yes, sir. And like I say, the parking spaces, we just have so many that are assigned to us. I think that probably is a misleading.
Do you come early?
You come, yeah, that's right. That's right. We'll send reinforcements.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Deputy.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time.
Yes. Next on our agenda will be the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency. Homer Bryson is our director, and we'll be on page 12 of your track sheet.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Afternoon.
Thought I was going to be last and I could get y'all out of here early, but the chairman just destroyed my plan because my presentation is very simple.
You keep talking, you'll drag it on out.
We only have statewide changes, as most of the agencies do, and the biggest of those for us are the merit-based pay adjustments. And on behalf of the employees of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, I just want to say thank you to the governor for putting that in the package, and we hope that you support that package.
Well, thank you, Mr. Director, because I know that you have been very busy in the last 12 months dealing with hurricane relief, and we appreciate the hard work that your men and women have done on behalf of the agency, on behalf of the state of Georgia, in delivering the assistance that's needed down in Southwest Georgia.
Thank you. And with that, we have no bond package. So, Mr. Chairman, if you have questions, we'll be glad to entertain them.
I have a question. How is the attached agency in terms of the startup for the 911 commission? How is that proceeding?
It's going well. It's been a good partnership between us and DOR, and we're actually in the early stages now of developing a tracking mechanism with OPB on how to transfer those funds from DOR into the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority. We should start receiving those funds here in the next couple of months, and we'll transition the single employee that's in that agency now from state dollars to those revenue dollars. And hopefully, as we get a better feel for what those revenues really are, we'll look at the opportunities and chances that we can move forward with enhanced 911 and the other issues in our state related to interoperability. And I do want to get on your calendar, Mr. Chairman, and have a conversation related to that, hopefully maybe sometime next week.
Sounds good. Mr. Director, I just wanted to tell you how much I've appreciated working with you. You have led the charge at DNR before, and you have led the charge with the Department of Corrections most recently, and now overseeing GMA. I know that Chairman Powell has echoed those compliments to you on numerous occasions on your leadership and your ability to steer a ship very well. So I just wanted to let our new members know that you have quite a history working through our law enforcement ranks, and we appreciate your service.
Thank you, and I appreciate what each one of you do too.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to say, hadn't had a chance to say it, but certainly thank you for all you've done, Mr. Director, and just for the new members, to let them know that we trained you well on the coast of Georgia. We got you ready to come on up here. Made us proud.
I have nothing but respect for Representative Williams. He used to call me when I was game warden on the coast, and talk about trying to help the deer hunters down there. He said, they're not going to vote for me, but I like them anyway.
I'm a realist.
I've heard some speeches you've given. I bet you got a lot of votes.
I picked up surprisingly. I was surprised.
And you're supporting what was it, the bait bill many years ago. I think that probably helped you as well. Yeah, that's good.
I don't know if this touched the ethics folk, but I sure keep a lot of deer meat in my fridge.
Well, thank you, Mr. Director. I appreciate your presentation today. Thank you for being here.
Thank y'all.
We'll take a short recess, and then we'll come back. Let me check the time here. It's 4:21, so if we could take about 4:30, let's get right back on it, okay? All right, let's get started, everybody. I don't want to lose my prize committee members here that have. Well, we are honored to have our interim director, and so we'll go ahead with Mr. Ward. If you'll go ahead and go through the budget, it's a very simple request. So we'll let you take it right off from the top and knock it out.
Yeah, since the request is so simple, I want to take just a minute to introduce my staff.
Oh yes, go ahead. Thank you.
I have Alan Watson right here. He's the Assistant Commissioner of Administration and Finance with me today. Also, I have seated behind me Ricky Myrick, who's the Assistant Commissioner for Facility Operations. Also, I have Jay Sanders, who's the Assistant Commissioner for Inmate Services. I have Peter Adams, who's the Deputy CFO. I have Christian McKinney, who's my Budget Director. And also I have Chris Walker, who's the Director of Strategic Planning for me. And I have Rob Throwell, who is my legislative liaison. And these are the ones that kind of make me look good every day, so we'd be remiss without introducing those individuals. And first of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me here today, you and the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the FY20 Governor's recommendations for the Georgia Department of Corrections. If you follow the recommendations, we're going to begin in section 19, page 9 through 11 for your tracking sheet. First, we're going to talk about the statewide changes, the merit-based adjustments. That's a little bit about $12.1 million. You'll see an adjustment in our employee share of state health benefits. That's about a $3.3 million reduction right there. Next, you'll see the adjustment to our employee share of TRS. That's $115,312. Next, you'll see the adjustment to our DOS, agency insurance premiums, and that's about agency and cyber insurance premium, that's about $297,000. And next, you'll see adjustment in our teamwork, which is $154,000, and for a little bit over $9.3 million in our statewide changes altogether. And if you look on the next page, starting with the agency-specific changes, you'll see with tracking number 9.27, administration, Scott Maurer with the deputy with DCS talked about the transfer of positions. You'll see included in that administration program includes a transfer of just over $300,000 to DCS to support those 9 reentry positions he was discussing, previously funded through a grant. Next, you'll see with 9.56 is the health program. The governor recommends a total of $14 million for costs related to the new mental health and dental contract. What we're doing there, we're putting everything under one umbrella by combining the mental health and the dental contract. That's a little bit, about $11 million of that is in new funding. Then you have another $3 million that's in redirect from the EHR project. And if you go down to offender management on 9.65, what that is, sir, we're gonna utilize existing funds to provide a 5%.
Commissioner Ward, can we just go back real quick to the 19.5.6? Now, this was a contract that was issued. You had it put out for a request for proposals, and rebid that contract. Is that right?
Yes.
And in the course of rebidding it, the company that had the dental and mental health before, did they also secure this bid?
They bid on it.
They bid on it.
Yes.
And who ultimately got the award?
It's still out.
It's still out?
We're still working on contract negotiations, so we haven't posted a notice of intent to award at this point.
I see. Okay. All right. And we're kind of showing our hand with our numbers here, aren't we? Yeah, we are. Okay.
Well,
Thank you, Representative Williams. Just confirm that. I mean, we just turning it over right here, and yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Well, y'all kind of threw me off my game a little bit, but yes, sir. Somebody's gonna get fired later, so we'll take care of that. Also, you'll see down at 19.65 That's the offender management. We're gonna utilize existing funds to provide a 5% contract rate increase for our county correction institutions. What that's gonna amount to is like a $1 per day per diem increase. Presently, we're paying the counties $20 per day to house our state sentence inmate. That would increase that to $21 per day by
But
doing that.
And we're paying private prisons, what, 46, 48, almost 49. It just depends on the inmate and the facility. But I mean, we have a wide gap here. And if I'm remembering correctly, the CCIs are housing what, about 10 to 12,000.
Almost like 9,000.
9,000. Okay,
Yes.
9,000 state prisoners. Is that right?
Yes.
And these are folks that are, I guess, the less violent, high skill levels that are used throughout the state. They are able to participate in doing some labor projects throughout the states in cooperation with local governments. And am I remember that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And we have that significant differential there
Yes.
on those inmates. And why is that other than just an appropriations issue?
Just been an appropriation issue, but we're self-funding this 1%, this 5% contract rate increase. And the reason we're able to do that, we had a couple of the county facilities that didn't renew their contracts. So we saw opportunity to give them a per diem increase internally.
So we lost two,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're taking the monies that we lost and we're spreading that around the ones that have remained.
Yes.
Is there concern that we would lose more?
No, because one of the ones who've already closed, they're feeling the pinch because I guess they underestimated how much they were saving by utilizing those details.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they got a big budgetary hit for that county, so they might try to come back online.
So if we give them a $1 increase for all the rest of them, but maybe not a $1 increase for the one that wants to come back online, is that?
No, I'm not saying that, sir.
Just asking. I'm just asking that. I am concerned. I mean, the audit report that was done over the break by the Department of Audits, looked at this issue and spent some time on it, and they raised some concerns about the funding that we're allocating,
Yes.
and made some suggestions that we look at that. So I'll just commend that to the committee to look at that issue with a little finer pencil point on as we debate these issues and discuss them. Other questions from members of the committee? Williams, go ahead. Representative Williams, go ahead.
I was, and I appreciate, obviously, your great negotiating skills and I'm glad you started saying 5% instead of $1. It just sounded better.
Mm-hmm.
But I would hope that we'd look, because that's pretty tough.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a service for counties in the work, but then we got some real low labor costs here. But $21 a day, and it's unfortunate, but in this state, if the reality is, some counties are so doggone poor to $21 sounds good. I just hope we can, at some point, do better. I understand the budget, and you have to come before us, and we're sneering and holding back, and you got some things you really need, and you don't want to mess. But please consider that, because I get nervous when I see counties cheering because they're getting a little correctional. So there's something wrong with the state then. But I'd like to see that be a better number. I listened to the chairman, he's exactly right. We just need to do a little better there. And then but don't cut off the window washing and grass cutting.
We won't, sir. We won't, sir. We won't.
Chairman Ballard, do you have a question? Okay.
This is not your document, if you don't mind, but the Augusta University had a thing saying that the average length of sentenced inmate has increased. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what about the recidivism rate is so good? Why is it that the average sentence has increased? How do those two marry
Well,
up?
longer sentences. Yeah, where criminal justice reform did exactly what it was designed to do, divert the low-lying offenders, drug users away from those hardened beds and save the hard bed for those more violent sex offenders.
So
that's what we're seeing.
we're going through the mild ones quicker, but the ones that are staying longer are staying pretty long.
Yes,
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
They have a longer reservation. Other questions from members of the committee? Let me, if I could, Mr. Commissioner, if you just could, if your staff could wait around, because I do want to ask some more questions. I want to go through our audit that we received from the Department of Audits. We're going to ask them to come up and answer some questions about the audit. So I do want you to remain in case we have questions that we need to bounce back off of you. And then also we wanted to talk with Augusta University about the synergies now between with DOC and the university system and the medical attention that they're providing for the inmates. So with that, we'll ask those gentlemen to come up. We have a few, Joseph Sharina, the Vice President of Correctional Healthcare, and then Margie Miller with Augusta University are both here to join us, and if I could ask them to come forward. Thank you for being here. What I'd like what I'm asking, and Chairman Powell had piqued my interest. He's been paying some attention to this new relationship, and I wanted you to kind of give us an update on how the relationship's going, how many people you're treating, and give us a kind of a status report on the health of that relationship, if you will.
Yes, sir. First, I would like to thank Mr. Chairman and the subcommittee members for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the impact of our offender healthcare cost. Our relationship originated back in 1997. That was an agreement. It was with the Medical College of Georgia and a Department of Corrections. The goal was to deliver that base healthcare system. Since that time, in 2007, we also took on the Department of Juvenile Justice. Currently, we're servicing approximately 46,000 of the offenders in the population. As you identified, the 9,000 of that total population is from the private sector or private prisons. As far as what are we doing, as far as how is the interagency partnership, there's some major advancements in what we do. Be honest with you, sir, I'm trying to find the slide that I would like to utilize to articulate this. We're healthcare services inside the system. We provide most of the services that we have to initiate or address all the cost to the public safety of our inmates. We have a lot of chronic care disease. As you look in our slide deck on page 3, we can go into a little more of what we're addressing. Our average length of stay, as you all already said, with our aging population is a concern. 12 years is the current sentence. Our average offender is 38 years of age. With an aging population, and as you can see with the 65 and over, it's starting to gain an increase as far as the total population that we serve. This is important, and then we'll go into the next slide, which talks about the chronic illnesses. 38% of our population that we provide medical services to have a chronic illness. Now, those illnesses could be HIV, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, and dialysis. With that chronic illness, you can see that there's also an increase to the cost. If you go to the 5th slide, this depicts some of the increase in chronic illnesses and our aging population. This is going to directly affect some of the costs to pharmacy, laboratory, specialized services, ensuring that these individuals have the care that they need according to constitutional level of care. We also have an increase in claims. This rate is increasing due to the fact of an aging population and the chronic care that we have to provide. Go to the next slide. We talked about the increase in claims, and we're just demonstrating. Currently, in the first 7 months, if you look at FY19, you can see we're 7 months in, and we're projected to do 55 million in just claims alone. The other thing that I wanted to bring to the attention was the pharmaceutical cost, and that's in the next slide. The pharmaceutical costs just doesn't affect us, it affects all the public, but it will affect our cost as well. If you look at the insulin prices, as of October of 18, it's across the board 39%. We talked about the aging population, we talked about the chronic illness being diabetes, and this is just one aspect or shadowing of the increased cost of pharmaceutical or drugs. We have a
Now, how are you able to negotiate more favorable rates in the purchase of these pharmaceuticals?
Yes, we are, and that's the great relationship that we have under the university umbrella and with our partnership with local hospitals. We do have 340B pricing, which is a cost savings. Approximately since 2012, we've saved approximately $80 million. So yes, we are doing that, but we're maximizing the efficiency in that category. This is generalized costs that we really don't have that opportunity with the 340B pricing.
And what percentage savings did you think that is approximately on the I guess the market-based cost versus the 340B?
The 340B pricing, to be honest with you, I'd have to get back with you on that.
Okay.
I don't have that information.
All right. Chairman Williams, Representative Williams, you have a question. Chairman from Liberty County.
As my committee, I'm chairman of Liberty County. I just ain't got no other representatives there. Let me say, as I look at these pharmaceutical costs, and we get mad about a lot of things in Georgia, but I wish Attorney General Carr was still here, because this needs to be lumped into that suit. This is the biggest ripoff since the ripoff of our poultry lab in Gainesville, $14 million with a leaking roof in 3 years. Terrible. It's criminal. If you pay this with your buying volume and your negotiating skills, can you imagine what John Q. Georgian is paying? This is authorized stealing, and we've got to put a stop to it, because we are being held up by professional stick-up artists, and I hope they all fly into Charlie Brown, but I'd sure like to see us put them in the judge's courtroom.
I agree, sir. If you look in the next slide, it really does give you an overview of just the impact of these 3 drugs alone and what that will do in the next year's budget. So this is more planting the seed of what potentially could be coming as far as the increase in healthcare costs to our inmate population. Even with our partnership and our 340B pricing, our ability to streamline some of our cases, we do a lot of our healthcare within the wire. So we do it at Augusta State Medical Prison. We're doing a lot of services, and we're trying to reduce the cost, contain the cost as much as we possibly can. But some of these, as I have identified, these are items outside of our control. It can't be budgeted. It's, as we know, as they change the pricing for drugs, it's midstream. It's halfway into our budget that they did this. So,
Chairman Ballinger.
I was just wondering about kind of Medicaid and Medicare and how that's influenced by our prison population. Can you speak to that?
yes, we are leveraging Medicaid reimbursement for those that qualify. And we also have a patient assistant program for the drugs. So we are leveraging that as well. So those are the 2 key parts that we are leveraging as far as Medicare in our system.
So, so you said some of them, I'm sorry, you kind of were talking about Medicaid at one point, and then you kind of bled over into Medicare. So I wasn't really sure. So could you speak to, you know, the Medicare portion, what portion of the population is covered by that? How does that reimbursement work? Can you speak to that relationship?
I could have to get back with you on the numbers, the total numbers, that granular. I didn't bring that information, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, unless something has changed, I don't believe that you're Medicaid eligible while you're incarcerated.
Okay, so, because he said that they were,
We
so.
can confirm that, but unless
Okay.
it's changed, I don't believe.
We have
Okay.
DJJ as well, so we are following some of the
Okay.
youth. They are covered.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, the youthful offenders, the younger prisoners would be covered by Medicaid, or Peach Care or whatever for kids. But so, if you could just kind of clarify some of those reimbursement rates and kind of what that relationship looks like, as far as, you know, Medicaid and Medicare, you know, because you pointed to one of your slides kind of indicated your aging population and their increasing medical needs. How much of that is going to be a state responsibility and how much of that is going to be covered with Medicare? So I was
Okay.
just kind of, if you could speak to that, that would be awesome.
I will. Yeah, the Medicare eligibility, I can say this, just for the patient assistance, we have covered probably $816,000 thus far. And that's slowly progressing as they come on. We are trying to add them to the system. That's under just the patient assistant for medication.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we appreciate your time here today, and we'll look forward to getting the follow-up information that Chairman Ballinger has requested. And so we thank you for being here, and thank you for providing the update. I think it's important that the committee understand there's a whole nother level of inmate care that is provided through Augusta University, and I thought that would be helpful to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and
Chairman
subcommittee
Powell,
chairs.
what's your, go ahead. You're on.
I am. And I don't even know where to start about asking what y'all have actually looked at on this, on the medicine pharmaceutical cost. You know, like my good friend over here, Mr. Williams, I'm not sure if he's running for Congress or wanting to switch parties with his indignation. But, you know, but I agree. But I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the chart about the, looking at the chart just on insulin prices. And, you know, that was always something. It was just supposed to, insulin in the old days was just bare bones. It was one of the cheaper drugs there was. But have y'all looked at other things? Have y'all talked to your counterparts in other states about some type of a compact buying schedule or something? You know, I don't know enough really about it. I'm like most people. Nobody really is experts about pharmaceuticals. To me, in this country, it's a shame when you have to pay what we pay or the citizens pay for this, and that's affect them not only for what they have to buy personally, but also their budget, their tax dollars that go to this. But when you look at the Canadian system and stuff like this, is there anything that could be done to force the issue about some type of pricing schedule that's something that's basic and not just exorbitant? You know, when Al made a mention about the Attorney General here earlier and filing on the opioid situation. You know what? This is as big a criminal act as anything I've ever seen with what the pharmaceutical companies are able to get away with. So my question is there anything that y'all have done about consulting with your counterparts in other states or to see what can be done to force the issue?
Yes, we have consulted with a group in Minnesota and their consortium of pharmacists. Hence how we got to the patient assistance program and utilizing and leveraging that. But there's other processes we should look into. We will look into them. At this time, I can't say. We're looking to legislative action to help and assist with cost containment of drugs, not just for our environment, but for everyone.
Good questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Chair and
Thank you.
subcommittee.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'd like to call up our Department of Audits, Lisa Kiefer, Deputy Director in Performance Audit Division, and Leslie McGuire, the Director of Performance Audit Division. If y'all could come and join us. The committee is aware that, and you've been provided a hard copy of it, but I know that you probably have seen the online version, that this past December, the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts the Performance Audit Division performed an audit on addressing a couple of questions that the Appropriations Committee had raised. And in raising those questions, the department has performed the audit that you have before you. The questions were geared towards a couple of aspects, but one was related to the Department of Corrections plan. What is the long-term plan for the Department of Corrections in terms of providing bed space? And then secondarily, as a part of that, was the private prison beds, would they be a more cost-effective alternative to adding more prisons facilities, state prison facilities? And so the department has gone through and provided us with an audit on those points. And so I wanted to, just ask them to come in and give us just a very brief synopsis of that. It's actually contained in their answers are contained in Appendix B of that, A, page 24. There's a table of recommendations that resulted from the audit, and you can see that table there. But I'll just let you give a brief overview of the audit, and then I have some questions.
Thank you, Chairman. As you said, the report was requested by the House Appropriations Committee. The request asked that we look at GDC's plan as it related to potential increase in a bed space need, and then whether or not the private prisons were a cost option for dealing with that increase. So we did a couple of things to address the question. First, we tried to determine whether or not there actually was going to be an increase in bed space demand. And using the Department of Corrections 5-year projections, we estimate that 1,277 offenders will be coming into the system over the next 5 years. So we looked at that 1,277 and assumed that they would look like the current population in the prison, and tried to determine where and if it would place a strain on a particular type of facility within the correction system. So on the whole, the Department of Corrections had sufficient bed space to cover 1,277 incoming prisoners over the 5 years. But when you break it down into subpopulations and start looking at male medium risk offenders or female offenders that may need special mission type facilities, that's where we started to see pressure points inside their system. And so we then looked to see whether or not the cost of housing those prisoners, how the cost would compare. The male medium risk offenders were the largest population that we saw coming in, and that's the population that the private providers also can house. And so we looked to see whether what the cost comparability was on that. So we found, we identified 5 prisons that were serving the same population in terms of sex and risk classification, and were of a similar size. And we used 5 so that we could get to a comparable total population between the number that the privates are serving and the number in state custody. And we found that those costs were comparable. There are several things that our review did not do. It did not assess the quality of those services that are provided either inside the state facilities or inside the private facilities. While we did also note that the CCIs, the County Correctional institutions house some of those male low-risk offenders, we did not fully evaluate the CCIs as a placement. And we also did not evaluate the need to build additional prisons in the long term.
Good, it's very helpful. You had stated that earlier that there was a number that you had 1,277 was the projection number, but I'm not seeing that as I'm understanding the graph that you provide on page 3 of the report. It's Exhibit 3, and in that delta that I calculated, and over the 5 years, I got 1,700 or a 3% increase. So could you explain the difference between what you've shown in the delta in Exhibit 3 versus the number you just gave us of 1,200?
Yes, sir. So we looked at the number that would be coming into state prison as opposed to those that might be served in a detention center or a transition center, some other type of facility. So when we took that total number and applied the same demographics that currently exist in the system, that's how we came to the 1277.
So 1277 pertains going into the prisons, not the detention centers or the CCIs?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then in the audit, as I understand it from the, looking at it globally, you also examined, relatively speaking to other states, what is the approximate percentage of the population that may be housed within a private prison? And in that, your report came up with it being about 15.6%.
Yes, sir.
And that's close to the average of all of the other states that you looked at. Is that correct?
Of the other states that use the private prison option, yes, sir.
So we're pretty much in line with the average, not going to the excess of Oklahoma at 26%.
That's correct.
Okay. I was also looking at this. I know you compared you said you looked at 5 prisons.
Yes, sir.
But there are 18 male medium
Correct.
prisons, if I'm following your report correctly.
You are.
And as a state, we have to pay for those inmates, regardless of the size of the prison. We still have to provide them housing in locations, and those prisons sizes vary. And your report provides that to us, if I recall. I think you listed out the various different prisons that were evaluated and their approximate populations.
Yes, sir.
Why did you go to 5 when we've got 18 we have to pay for as taxpayers?
We went to 5 because we were thinking about placement of that increase in the population, and when we looked at the effect on the male medium risk classification facilities, it looked like inside the state-run prisons they would reach maximum capacity, and the private prisons offered additional capacity, and so we were looking to see if those costs were comparable. What we were trying to do was ensure that we were doing an apples to apples, and that the cost to operate the male medium risk facilities for essentially the same number of prisoners that are operating in the private prisons married up. When we looked at the 18, the cost, I would say the cost is still comparable. It was around $51, and the cost for the 5 that we pulled was $44.56.
56.
$44.56. Yes.
And the private prisons were $49.07, correct?
Yes, sir.
So when you look at the 18, which would be the entire per diem for housing in state prisons, and that being a comparable of the entire system, then we're at $51.08, if my math was correct on all 18, if you
Correct.
looked at that per diem. So it's actually a little bit more costly in terms of housing them within state prisons, if you're looking at the entirety of them.
Correct.
And then you said you wanted to make sure you had an apples to apples comparison, but does the per diem amount that you included in here factor in the state and sales tax and local property taxes that the private prisons would pay?
No, sir, it does not.
And does it take that into consideration? And I think you would agree with me that the state prisons don't pay property taxes or state taxes, sales taxes, so that those per diem costs are not reflected in these numbers.
They are not.
So private prisons are paying taxes, the state prisons are not.
That's correct.
Okay,
They'd
so
be-
that
Not to my knowledge.
is that not correct?
That's true. I was just gonna clarify that I would assume that the taxes are built into the private cost.
I would too, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that really means that we're not quite apples to apples, because we're not seeing in the state per diem, we're not seeing a reflection of property taxes. So I would agree with you.
There are slightly different cost structures between private and public sector, and that would be one.
Right, and then what about insurance liabilities? The cost of insurance, we're self-insured, but what about, do we factor into that cost? You would think that that's included in the per diem cost for the private prison, is that right?
Yes, and I believe it is included in this number.
Okay, and so, did you ask them for a breakdown to find out if it was or was not?
No.
No, okay.
Insurance?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the recent set of questions that we're working with, that's.
It is included. It is included.
The recent set of questions, I'm sorry?
When, so we had gone back to GDC and asked for clarification on a couple of things, and it's our understanding that insurance is included
Okay, so in the private prison per diem or in the states?
in the state.
And then what about the cost of construction for the facilities? Because the way the contracts are for the private prisons, they are absorbing all costs. It's loaded into the per diem. Is the cost of construction of the state facilities reflected in the state per diem?
So we checked with GSFIC, and the state doesn't have any outstanding construction bonds right now. We did look at the bonds that GDC does have for maintenance and repair, large maintenance and repair projects, or buses, cars, that sort of thing. And there were a couple of, so that number is not included in our estimate. There are a couple of ways to include it, and so we ran that analysis, and it looked like it would increase the cost per day per prisoner by about $2.
On the state's per diem side?
Yes.
And then, well, I'm glad you went back and looked at that. Did you also, because we have spent a considerable amount of dollars in terms of bonding for hardening of prisons, and that's probably what Chairman Bowser was going to remind me of. So do we factor that into that $2
That's
additional?
included in that, yes, sir.
Okay, and then is there a comparison as to did you inquire as to the financing differential between the private prison's ability to finance and their rate versus our AAA bond rate as a state of Georgia, that we're getting fantastic bonding rates? Was there any comparison of that to see if there's a differential there?
No, sir, we did not do that.
Okay. The other, one of the questions that was posed by the General Assembly or by this committee was question number 2. What was and this is under your Appendix A on page 24. It says, what is the projected population increase over the next 5 years? And I consider that one question. And then the second part of that question is, and does the Georgia Department of Corrections have sufficient plans for how to address it? And I would have assumed from that question that we would have gotten some numbers. So like the first question, what's the projected population increase? And you've told me that you're anticipating it based upon the department's numbers to being 1,277.
Yes, sir.
But that wasn't here, as I'm glad you told us today. In the answer to the question, it just says that the department should consider a differentiation in terms of the bed utilization rates, which I think is a very good suggestion, because that would help us to anticipate cost if you differentiate their rates. But I didn't see that in the answer to the question here.
If you look on page 13 of our report, it has the projections broken out. I think
Right.
you're looking at our appendix, which just quickly summarizes our recommendations. So
Right.
it is in the report here if you look at page 13.
And I'm just commenting that it would be helpful to have it right here.
Okay.
So that, when we look at that end, when you refer me to the appendix saying, here's the questions and the answers, the recommendations, that would be helpful to have it there. And then the other question was, does the Department of Corrections have sufficient plans to address it? And at the beginning of it, it suggested that they don't from the audit report. So I don't know whether y'all decided that they either do have plans, they don't. It was confusing. At the beginning, it says they don't. There's no long-term plan for that. But then as you read through the report, it does seem to reflect that you, in discussions with them, that you did find that they had reports, they had a plan. I think you even mentioned a plan that's actually 2019 to 2023 or so, a 5-year plan. So I'm not sure what's the answer to the question.
So during the course of the audit, what we found is that GDC does a lot of tactical management and planning, and they do a lot of strategic management and planning. And they were looking at they were taking into account that total number when they were thinking about dealing with the increased population. Our recommendation, and as I said, when you look at the total number, there are enough beds to cover that total number. Our recommendation was that they start looking at it at a more granular level and determine whether that population was going to press on their facilities in certain places and create problems that they might not be able to see by looking at it at that macro level. And over the course of the audit, they came back with a plan for how to deal with the increased population. So it did change over the course of the audit.
Okay, well, I appreciate doing that, and it sounds like you're doing some further research, and asked additional questions to get more information to make the audit a more apples to apples. 'Cause I would disagree with the characterization that it's apples to apples. I mean, I think that there are some things in the audit that are missing that need to be added to it. And are you planning on submitting or updating this audit and providing a revised audit?
Not at this point, but if you have some additional questions that we can do some research and provide to you, we'd be happy to do that. I mean, there are some fundamental differences that we would not be able to totally account for because of difference in cost structure between the private prisons and public sector. So unless we were able to totally look into the components of the private prison, I don't know if we'll totally know whether we have a true apples to apples comparison. But we could look into it a little bit further.
But you'd agree with me, right now, this report doesn't give us an apples to apples comparison. It's a comparison, but we're missing construction costs, we're missing insurance for the state. No, on the state per diem.
Insurance is in there.
Is it built into the state per diem?
Yes.
And construction cost is built into that as well?
So there are no construction bonds outstanding for the state at this time, so there's no construction
So
cost.
you're not accounting for the costs that we incurred to build the facilities?
No, sir.
No.
Because they were built a long time ago.
But you would agree with me that the private sector would be factoring in the cost of construction?
They would, but I mean, the state is paying more of a rental payment for it than, they're not renting to own the facility by the end. So there is kind of that unique consideration too, is yes, they ultimately own the asset. The state is paying for some portion of the cost for them to build. So back to, because of those nuances, it will be difficult to get a true apples to apples comparison.
And over this time, you went back and looked back in multiple years, back 5 years in terms of these numbers. And I know that bond packages were issued within the last 5 years for a significant amount of money spent on hardening prisons. Is that at all factored into this? Into the cost of the per diem?
So when I was saying we went back and pulled that information, we did pull the bonds that were related to significant maintenance and repair. We pulled all of the bonds that were outstanding for the Georgia Department of Corrections, and that is what including that amount is what results in a $2 increase on the cost per day for prisoner amount.
So does that need to be added to this report?
Well, one consideration is that when we were looking at this, in terms of the questions that we were asked, what we were providing was an operational analysis of the cost per day. I'm not sure how
Back
to
to, I
answer
think our
this.
conclusion, if you added $2 to the cost, our conclusion would be the same, which is the costs between the two are currently comparable.
Okay, but the numbers would just be a little higher?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, and then the other part of this was that there's I'm trying to find the page on my computer here, so as soon as I can get to it. There was in looking at the administrative cost, you included in the audit an exhibit that was Exhibit 6. And in that, there are expenses by program there that you're mentioning for the Department of Corrections. And just so I understand this, that when I totaled that number up and I took out the cost of private prisons to that, I came up with this to over $1 billion. The administrative cost, the cost of the foods to farms operations, the cost of providing health, the offender management, all of those things are part of our correction system, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so all those become costs that are overall costs that are provided to each and every prisoner. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when I look at that number and taking out the private prison costs that we're paying in terms of the rental / per diem rates, then it seems to me that number is about $1 billion. And when I calculated that out on the population that's not in the private prisons that we're caring for as a state, I came up with a number of about $64 per day per inmate was the number that I came up with, and that doesn't factor in the $2 that you've just explained to us today. Am I off in my understanding of that?
No, sir. I think when we looked at, if you look at Exhibit 11, when we looked at state prisons, all state prisons, we came out with $65.58 as an
Okay.
offender cost per day.
Okay, good. All right. Well, then my very back of the napkin math wasn't so off then. I appreciate all that information. The last couple of things is that I think it's important to point out that when this audit, at the very end of the audit, in the methodology section, you had stated in here that you were not following the, and I want to get to the exact language, that you were not following the, it was not conducted in accordance with the generally accepted governmental auditing standards, the GAS. And that your explanation was there was time constraints involved in doing that, but that you were following the policies as they pertain to the performance audits division's policies. And one of the policies, as the report says, is that you would identify any data that would limitations that you had for the reader, so the reader would identify those. And in this discussion here, I think there's some missing pieces that we've discussed here that needed to be included in order to understand fully this report. And I think it's important that when we're giving an audit for the state, that we are providing our disclaimers about the methodology we're using, not in Appendix B, where most readers are never going to go. But I would submit to you that needs to be in the executive summary, that this is the standard we used, and I think that would be helpful to the reader to understand it fully, that it's qualified, not buried at page 29 of the audit. And with that, I'll let Chairman Ballinger ask a few, or no, Belton ask a few questions.
Thank you very much. In the first line of the audit, you say that the expect a 2.5% increase over the next 5 years. Is Georgia increasing by 2.5%, or where did you come up with that figure, that assumption?
So the 2.5%, we use GDC's population projection that is conducted by their contractor, ARC. We used that, and then, as I described earlier, we applied the current demographics of the population to get to the 1277 that is in the state prisons.
So is Georgia increasing by 2.5% overall population?
Overall population?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me end by saying this, that I appreciate the hard work that you have to do and the time constraints that you have to do that. When we make a request, it probably gets to you in April. When was the request? April, May? May, and you have a short time window to go and assemble the information, and I appreciate that. And we do value, I don't know if you heard me refer to the audits, you're probably sitting in here earlier. You probably think very few of us read these audits after you work so hard to produce them. I want to reassure you that we do. And they do factor into, at least with respect to this subcommittee, they do factor into the questions and the analysis that we want to ask of the departments, because what you are doing is you are illuminating issues that we may not see. And so it is very helpful to have your audits. It's very helpful to see what you've dug into. And so I appreciate that hard work, and I want to express that gratitude to you. I just think that on this particular audit, I've had some trouble with it. I had some concerns with it. I didn't feel like we were getting an apples to apples. I understand how you're using the word comparable, but I think there's more meat to this that we needed, that I feel like I needed to see. But I appreciate the hard work that your department does, and I really appreciate you being here to help us understand the audit more fully. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, any closing comments or remarks that you may have? Well, I want to extend my gratitude to you all for staying a little bit later than planned. And tomorrow, I hope we'll end on time at 5 o'clock. And I appreciate you all being here and staying the length of the meeting. Thank you. With that, we'll stand adjourned until tomorrow.